Most films end when the screen goes black. The story concludes. The credits roll. And whatever the film was trying to say is left behind in the theater, filed away as entertainment memory or momentary distraction. But some horror films refuse that ending. They don't linger because they were frightening. They linger because they unsettled something that couldn't be easily dismissed. Audiences argued about them. Critics struggled to place them. Broadcasters hesitated. Censors intervened. And years later, people still found themselves thinking about what those films implied, not what they showed. These are not movies remembered for a single scene or shock. They are remembered for the discomfort that followed, for the questions they raised without answering, for the way their reputations shifted as culture caught up with what they were suggesting. At the time of release, many of these films were misunderstood, criticized, or quietly pushed aside. Later, they were reconsidered, reframed, sometimes even defended, not because they became less troubling, but because audiences became more willing to confront why they were. This is not a countdown of fear. It's a countdown of after effects. These films did not end when the credits rolled. They continued elsewhere in debate, in memory, and in the unease they left behind. Fact 1. The Dark Secret of Harvest Home, 1978. When The Dark Secret of Harvest Home was broadcast, it entered homes quietly. Its slow pace and episodic structure did not invite instant reaction. Some viewers found it uneventful, others appreciated its restraint. There was little controversy and no immediate reassessment. What lingered was familiarity. Audiences remembered the community it portrayed not as threatening, but as orderly, welcoming, and coherent. That calm persistence stayed in memory more than any individual moment. Years later, as public awareness of insular communities and group conformity expanded, the miniseries began to be re-examined. Viewers returning to it described a growing unease, recognizing how gradually control had been normalized. Today, Harvest Home is often cited as a work whose impact increases with distance. Its reputation rests on how convincingly it depicted assimilation rather than coercion, and how long it takes to realize what that means. The series endures because its discomfort does not announce itself. It settles slowly and remains. Fact 2. The Possession of Joel Delaney, 1972. Initial reactions to The Possession of Joel Delaney were restrained. Critics largely treated it as another entry in a cycle of possession films, and its urban setting drew less attention than its themes. The film did not provoke immediate controversy, nor did it achieve significant recognition at the time. What remained with viewers, however, was an unease that surfaced later. Audiences recalled the film not for spectacle, but for its subtle shift in tone, the feeling that something had changed without explanation. That quiet transformation proved difficult to articulate, yet persistent. As discussions around psychological health and identity became more prominent, the film's reputation evolved. Viewers began reassessing its ambiguity, interpreting it as a reflection on how behavioral change is often overlooked or misread until consequences appear. Today, The Possession of Joel Delaney is remembered as a film whose impact was delayed rather than immediate. Its after effect lies in recognition, the realization that subtle disturbance can be more enduring than overt shock. Fact 3. The Norliss Tapes, 1973. When the Norliss Tapes first aired, many viewers were unsure how to receive it. Its documentary-style presentation blurred familiar boundaries between fiction and report, leaving audiences uncertain about what they had actually watched. Some found the format intriguing. Others felt unsettled by its lack of narrative closure. The reaction was not fear, but confusion. What lingered was the sensation of incompleteness. Viewers described the experience as unresolved, as if crucial information had been withheld. The film's fragmented structure encouraged speculation rather than interpretation, and that uncertainty often resurfaced long after the broadcast ended. Over time, the film gained attention as an early example of horror presented as evidence rather than story. As audiences became more accustomed to true crime formats and unresolved case narratives, the Norliss Tapes began to feel increasingly prescient. Today, it is remembered for how effectively it destabilized viewer expectations. Its impact lies in the way it left audiences with unanswered questions and the discomfort of realizing that not all stories are meant to resolve cleanly. Fact 4. Born Innocent, 1974. Upon broadcast, Born Innocent triggered immediate public reaction. Viewer complaints flooded networks. Scenes were criticized as excessive, inappropriate, and irresponsible for television. The controversy centered not on horror, but on exposure what audiences believed should not be shown. What lingered was shock mixed with recognition. Unlike many films of its time, Born Innocent refused to soften institutional behavior. Viewers reported difficulty separating the film from reality, and discussions quickly moved beyond entertainment into questions of accountability and reform. In the years that followed, investigations into youth detention centers reframed the film's reputation. What had once been criticized as exaggeration began to resemble documentation. The outrage shifted direction from the film itself to the systems it depicted. Today, Born Innocent is remembered not as a horror film, but as one that refused to disappear because it exposed something audiences were unprepared to acknowledge. Its after effect persists as a reminder of how discomfort can signal truth rather than excess. Fact 5. The Possessed, 1977. The Possessed arrived during a period saturated with possession narratives, and as a result, it was often overlooked. Early reactions treated it as a conventional entry in a familiar cycle. Critics rarely engaged deeply with its implications, focusing instead on its surface resemblance to more prominent films of the era. Yet viewers who remembered it described a quieter after effect. The film's lingering impact stemmed from its unresolved tension between faith and interpretation. Rather than offering clear answers, it left audiences uncertain about whether belief had provided clarity or obscured understanding. As public conversations around mental health and misdiagnosis expanded, the film's reputation shifted. What once seemed derivative began to feel observant. Its refusal to resolve ambiguity gained significance in retrospect. Today, The Possessed is revisited less for its genre elements and more for the unease it leaves behind, a discomfort rooted in the cost of certainty and the consequences of explaining suffering too quickly. Fact 6. The Wicker Man, 1973. When The Wicker Man was first released, it struggled to find an audience. Its marketing confused viewers, and early cuts undermined its intended rhythm. Some critics dismissed it as uneven or tonally strange, unsure whether it was meant to be musical mystery or horror. The initial response was muted rather than hostile. What lingered was not fear but dissonance. Viewers remembered the calmness, the politeness, the songs, the apparent normalcy, and how that tone refused to align with expectations of horror. The discomfort arrived late, often after reflection, when audiences reconsidered how willingly the film invited trust. Over time, the film's reputation underwent a reversal. As restored versions circulated, The Wicker Man came to be seen as a study in belief systems and social cohesion rather than shock. Its impact grew as audiences recognized how quietly it challenged assumptions about consent and conformity. Today, it is frequently cited as a film that lingers because of how long it takes to reveal its implications. Its after effect lies in delayed recognition, the realization that the warning signs were present all along. Fact 7. Let's Scare Jessica to Death, 1971. Let's Scare Jessica to Death initially divided audiences with its ambiguity. Some viewers interpreted the film as a supernatural story, while others saw it as psychological drama. Critics debated whether its lack of clarity was intentional or simply unresolved. For many, the film felt incomplete rather than frightening. What stayed with audiences was not a conclusion, but a feeling of quiet unease. The film's refusal to clarify its threat left viewers uncertain about what they had witnessed. That uncertainty often resurfaced later, not during the viewing, but afterward, when reflecting on how easily perception could be questioned or dismissed. Over time, the film became associated with discussions around psychological vulnerability and social invalidation. Its reputation grew among viewers who recognized the discomfort of not being believed or understood. Today, Let's Scare Jessica to Death is remembered less as a ghost story and more as a film that lingers through doubt. Its impact lies in how it makes uncertainty feel personal and how that feeling remains long after the film ends. Fact 8. Images, 1972. Initial reactions to Images were marked by confusion. Audiences and critics alike found the film difficult to process, often labeling it inaccessible or overly abstract. Without clear answers or narrative anchors, many viewers left unsure of what they were meant to take away. What lingered, however, was a persistent unease. Viewers reported questioning their own interpretation long after the film ended. The lack of confirmation or resolution created a delayed psychological response, one rooted in doubt rather than fear. The experience felt unfinished, even after repeated viewings. As conversations around mental health and subjective perception evolved, the film's reputation shifted. Rather than being seen as deliberately obscure, it began to be appreciated for its refusal to stabilize reality for the audience. Today, Images is often discussed as a film that unsettles by undermining certainty. Its after effect is not anxiety, but instability, a lingering distrust and perception that extends beyond the viewing experience. That uncertainty is what keeps the film present in memory. Fact 9. Messiah of Evil, 1973. When Messiah of Evil was released, it passed through audiences almost quietly. There was little outrage and little praise. Many critics struggled to classify it, often describing the film as disjointed or unclear. Its lack of narrative urgency made it easy to overlook at the time, especially in an era crowded with more confrontational horror. Yet the film refused to disappear entirely. Those who remembered it spoke less about plot and more about a lingering sense of emptiness, the atmosphere of abandonment. The absence of clear explanation and the film's refusal to restore normalcy left viewers unsettled without knowing exactly why. Over the years, the film developed a cult reputation, rooted in mood rather than memory of events. Viewers returning to it often described a delayed reaction, a realization that the discomfort came not from fear, but from the suggestion of social collapse, without cause or resolution. Today, Messiah of Evil is frequently cited in discussions of horror that leaves an emotional afterimage rather than a narrative imprint. Its impact lies in how little it explains and how long that lack of explanation stays with the audience. The film endures because it offers no conclusion, only absence. Fact 10. The Brood, 1979. The Brood entered public conversation amid discomfort and debate. Initial reactions focused on its disturbing imagery, with critics questioning whether the film had crossed into excess. Some dismissed it as too personal, too confrontational, or too unsettling to be approached analytically. What stayed with audiences, however, was not the imagery itself, but the emotional residue it left behind. Viewers reported feeling unsettled by the film's refusal to separate personal pain from its consequences. The discomfort felt unresolved. As years passed, reassessment reframed the film. Critics began contextualizing it within broader discussions of trauma therapy and emotional expression. Rather than viewing it as provocation, it was increasingly seen as an exploration of psychological fallout. Today, The Brood is often cited in discussions about horror that lingers because it implicates the viewer emotionally rather than frightening them directly. Its reputation evolved from controversial to cautionary. The film endures because it refuses closure, leaving behind an aftereffect that remains difficult to process. Fact 11. Season of the Witch, 1972. When Season of the Witch first appeared, it was largely dismissed. Critics struggled to understand its intent, often describing it as unfocused or underdeveloped. Marketed alongside more conventional horror, the film failed to meet expectations of suspense or payoff, and quickly faded from mainstream attention. Yet among those who saw it, something lingered. Viewers spoke less about scenes and more about atmosphere, a pervasive sense of dissatisfaction and isolation that remained long after the film ended. The discomfort was subtle, difficult to articulate, and easy to overlook. Years later, as cultural conversations around emotional neglect, domestic dissatisfaction, and psychological isolation gained visibility, the film's reputation shifted. What once seemed aimless began to feel observant. What seemed restrained began to feel deliberate. Today's Season of the Witch is frequently re-examined as a film ahead of its time, not because it frightened audiences, but because it captured a psychological state that went largely unnamed when it was released. Its after effect lies in recognition arriving long after the initial viewing. Fact 12. Who Can Kill a Child, 1976. Upon its release, Who Can Kill a Child provoked immediate discomfort rather than admiration. Audiences and critics reacted less to its premise than to the moral position it forced them into. Many described the film as cruel or irresponsible, arguing that it crossed an ethical boundary by refusing to offer emotional distance or justification. What lingered after viewing was not fear, but paralysis. Viewers reported an inability to process what they had seen within familiar moral frameworks. The film left no clear stance, no comforting perspective, and no resolution that restored balance. Over time, discussion around the film shifted. Rather than debating its shock value, critics began examining why it was so difficult to forget. The discomfort stemmed from hesitation, from being asked to confront a scenario where established instincts failed. Today, the film is often referenced in discussions about horror that generates ethical unease rather than spectacle. Its reputation has grown quieter, but more persistent resurfacing. Whenever conversations turn to boundaries, the genre rarely crosses. Its impact endures because it leaves viewers questioning not what they saw, but how they responded, and why that response felt so inadequate. Fact 13. The Devils, 1971. Few films generated as much controversy at release as The Devils. Condemned by religious institutions, censored in multiple territories, and heavily edited for distribution, the film quickly became defined by what audiences were not allowed to see. Public discussion focused less on its themes and more on its perceived offensiveness. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the film refused to disappear. Viewers who did see it reported lingering discomfort rather than shock. The intensity of its imagery was not easily separated from the questions it raised about power belief and public spectacle. Over time, critical reassessment reframed the film. Scholars and historians began contextualizing it as a commentary on mass hysteria and institutional manipulation, rather than provocation for its own sake. The controversy became part of its legacy, inseparable from its meaning. Today, The Devils is discussed as much for its censorship history as for its content. Its impact lies in how it exposed the anxiety surrounding criticism of authority, and how fiercely that criticism was resisted. The film remains present not because it frightened audiences, but because it challenged structures that preferred silence. Fact 14. Alucarda, 1977. Alucarda was met with rejection long before it was met with analysis. Upon release, it was widely dismissed as excessive, chaotic, and offensive. Critics focused on its intensity rather than its implications. For many, the film crossed a line that could not be justified by genre conventions. Yet what remained with viewers was not shock but confusion. The film's relentless tone made it difficult to categorize. It wasn't easily absorbed as fantasy, nor comfortably dismissed as satire. The emotional response it provoked was closer to exhaustion than fear. As discussions around religious trauma and institutional abuse gained visibility decades later, the film's reputation began to shift. Audiences revisiting Alucarda found parallels between its depiction of control and real-world testimonies emerging from closed religious environments. The film did not become more restrained with time. Audiences became more willing to confront what it suggested. Today, Alucarda is often referenced in conversations about horror that overwhelms rather than entertains. Its impact persists not because it is frightening, but because it resists comfortable interpretation. It lingers as a reminder that some films disturb not by subtlety, but by refusing to look away. Fact 15. The Witchfinder General, 1968. When The Witchfinder General was released, the reaction was immediate and divided. Some critics condemned it as excessive, arguing that its brutality was unnecessary and exploitative. Others struggled to understand why a historical horror film felt so relentlessly uncomfortable. The controversy was not centered on accuracy, but on tone. The film refused to soften its subject matter or offer moral distance. What lingered with audiences was not a specific scene, but a sense of moral unease. The violence felt procedural rather than dramatic. Punishment appeared normalized. Authority operated without visible challenge. Viewers were left unsettled by how ordinary cruelty seemed within the film's structure. Over time, the film's reputation shifted. It came to be discussed less as a shock-driven exploitation piece and more as a study in institutional violence. Historians and critics began drawing attention to how the film portrayed systems of power rather than individual evil. Today, The Witchfinder General is often revisited not for fear but for discomfort. Its lasting impact lies in how it forces viewers to confront the mechanisms by which violence becomes acceptable, a theme that remains disturbingly relevant. The film endures because it does not allow easy moral release. It leaves behind an unresolved question about authority, obedience, and the cost of fear-driven justice. Most horror films fade once the experience ends. What remains is a memory of fear, brief, contained, and eventually replaced. But the films discussed here refused that pattern. They stayed present, not because they shocked, but because they unsettled something that took time to understand. Their impact grew slowly through reconsideration debate and the quiet realization that their discomfort was not accidental. Reputation changed. Context shifted. And what once felt excessive, confusing, or unnecessary began to feel deliberate. If one of these films stayed with you longer than expected, consider why. Not what it showed, but what it left unresolved. Which of these films do you think became more disturbing with time? And which one do you believe audiences still haven't fully reckoned with?